Hi everyone, and welcome to AWS Julie. For today's video, we're continuing with our new series on needed AWS fundamentals to ensure you pass your AWS certification exams. Let's dive into the fundamentals of an Amazon VPC. For this lesson, I want to do a high-level overview of an Amazon VPC, and we will be diving deeper into the fundamentals needed to build an Amazon VPC in later lessons. But for this fundamental series, I wanted to first add fundamentals for the core services in AWS. Now, for the real world, but also your certification exams, you really need to understand VPCs and know how to build them. You will most likely get 5 to 6 questions on VPCs specifically in your exam. So what is an Amazon VPC? Well, it is a virtual private cloud, so basically it's your very own virtual data center in the cloud. AWS allows us to provision our own VPC in a logically isolated section of AWS. And we can launch different resources and create our own virtual private network. We have complete control over this virtual networking environment, and that even includes choosing your own IP address ranges, creating your own subnets, and configuring access with your route tables and network gateways. And when we dive deeper later on in this series, we will walk through creating a public-facing subnet for applications to have access to the internet, but also create private subnets with no internet access to secure our database and our back-end systems. Remember, in an earlier lesson, we talked about security under the shared responsibility model lesson, but also under the AWS well-architected framework lesson. AWS offers multiple different layers of security. There are network access control lists, or NACLs, and security groups that we configure to control access to the resources inside our VPC. We also will have a later lesson where you can see how to create your own hardware virtual private network or VPN connection between your on-premises environment and your Amazon VPC so that you can use AWS as an extension of your current data center or current environment. And remember from an earlier lesson in this series, this is called a hybrid environment. So let's look at this physical diagram of the VPC we will end up creating throughout this fundamental series. So you will see we are inside AWS, and that is represented by the black line. And inside AWS, we have our VPC in a region. I chose the U.S. East Northern Virginia region because it's closest to me, but remember there are lots of different regions you can choose from. Northern Virginia was the first region, and it is the region that most of the new AWS services are released into first, so I usually choose that region, but it is also the region that goes down the most. You will notice that outside of the line of our VPC, we have an internet gateway, and the internet gateway talks to our router and allows traffic in and out of our VPC to the open internet. And remember, we are going to cover all of these in later lessons, but I wanted you to have an intro to VPCs in the fundamentals because it is an AWS core service. Then our internet gateway then talks to our route tables, and remember, we can configure our route tables with the needed permissions for our account. This is part of the AWS shared responsibility model that we are responsible for. Then the requested access is going to hit our NACLs, and NACLs act like a firewall and are the first line of defense. One important tip for the exam is to know all about network access control lists and security groups, especially that NACLs are stateless. And what stateless means is that you must add rules for all inbound and also outbound traffic for your VPC. Stateless simply means that they only see the rules one way. So if you add an inbound rule to your Amazon VPC, then you must also add an outbound rule to match that inbound rule. So you can allow rules and also deny rules. And another exam tip is that network access control lists allow you to block or deny certain IP addresses on your network. Then we hit our second line of defense, which are our security groups. And another exam tip is that security groups are stateful. And what that means is that any rule that you allow inbound traffic will automatically be allowed outbound, so you do not have to add specific outbound rules. Any traffic allowed in will also be allowed back out. Now you will also see that we have two different subnets, a private and public subnet. So remember from our last lesson, we can make our EC2 instance public and give them access to the public internet, but we can also make them private with no access to the public internet. So private subnets are great if you do not want traffic accessing your AWS resources, and usually private subnets hold our databases. You can still connect to your private subnet using the EC2 instance in the public subnet. And when you do this, this EC2 instance in the public subnet acts as a bastion host or jump box and allows us to access the private EC2 instance or database. So we would follow the access pattern through our gateway, through our network access control list, through the security group, and then from the public EC2 instance, we can SSH or jump into our private EC2 instance. And we'll be covering network fundamentals and IP addresses later on in this series, but I already have some networking fundamental lessons that I've already built, so I'll add a link to those lessons in the lesson description, but you can also click this link here. But if you notice, our public subnet is 10.16.0.0/20, and our private subnet is 10.16.32.0/20. So you can see that these are two different subnets, and these are subnetworks of our VPC CIDR range, which is 10.16.0.04/16. So back to our overview on an Amazon VPC, we just saw that we can launch subnets inside our VPC and choose the IP address ranges. And from our diagram and the shared responsibility model, we can create internet gateways and attach them to our VPCs. We can configure our route tables, and we can configure our network access control list and security groups to have security control over our AWS resources inside our Amazon VPC. We also have two types of VPCs. We have a default VPC and also a custom VPC. And for your exam, you should know the difference. Your AWS account comes with a default VPC. So you can immediately start building in AWS, and you really do not need to know anything. The default VPC comes with subnets, an internet gateway, route tables, security groups, network access control lists, and so on, already configured for you. And for the exam, there are differences between the default VPC and custom VPCs that you need to know. All subnets in your default VPC have a route to the internet, and each EC2 instance in the default VPC will have a public and also private IP address. VPCs also have some really cool features that we will dive deeper in throughout the series. VPCs can peer together, and that's called VPC peering. So you can configure your VPC for VPC peering and configure your route tables and so on, and the communications between the two peer VPCs will behave as if you were using a private network. VPC peering uses the private IP addresses to communicate. You can peer VPCs in different regions, you can peer VPCs with other AWS accounts and other VPCs in your same account. But for the exam, know that VPC peering is not transitive. You must configure each VPC to peer with the other VPC. We do have an option to make our VPCs communicate in a transitive way using a transit gateway. So let's quickly do an introduction to transitive peering because it will most likely be on your exam. So with VPC peering, we have a configuration like this diagram. So you can see VPC A is in the middle and is peered with the other VPCs. So A can talk to B, C, D, E, and B, C, D, and E can talk back to A. But B cannot talk to C, C cannot talk to E, D cannot talk to E, and so on. So if we want to set up D and E to talk to each other, we would have to create a peering connection between them specifically. But we have another option, and that is to set up transitive peering with the transit gateway. And again, we're going to be taking a deeper dive into transit gateway. but Transit Gateway allows transitive peerings. So all the VPCs, A, B, C, D, and E, can all communicate with each other. So for the exam, remember that a VPC consists of internet gateways, route tables, network access control lists, security groups, and subnets. And here's another exam tip. You may see a question on your exam about one subnet equals one availability zone, but you can have multiple availability zones in one subnet, and you will most likely have questions regarding security groups being stateful and network access control lists being stateless. And again, we'll be diving deeper into all of this in later lessons. If you found this content useful, a like and a subscribe would mean so much to me. It really helps me know what content y'all like, and it gives me an indicator that I'm building useful content that helps. Now in the next lesson, we'll cover another AWS core service, and that is Amazon EC2. Thanks so much for watching.